Welcome to Contradicting the Cosmos, the show where I refute the YouTube atheist, the Cosmic Skeptic. In today's episode, Mr. Cosmic is responding to a Prager University video about the Ten Commandments. Let's begin.
No document in world history so changed the world for the better, as did the Ten Commandments.
Which set? Which set of the Ten Commandments, I mean? As it happens, there are no less than 3 versions of the Ten Commandments administered to Moses in the Old Testament, only one of which is actually referred to as the Ten Commandments, and only 2 of which are written onto stone tablets. Now, funnily enough, as it happens, the most popular version of the Ten Commandments, the version detailed in Exodus 20, and in fact the version being presented here, is neither referred to as the Ten Commandments, nor is it written on stone tablets in the Bible. In fact, the version that is called the Ten Commandments and written onto stone tablets is wildly different from the more familiar version and contains things like keeping the Feast of Unleavened Bread. 43 Alley has a fantastic video on this. I'll leave a link in the description, recommend that you all watch it. But it's worth noting that the Ten Commandments that Dennis Prager are talking about are not actually the real Ten Commandments, at least not according to this guy.
First, it seems obvious that Mr. Cosmic did not seem to read all the chapters he posted. Exodus 20 and Deuteronomy 5 are the same commandments. Deuteronomy 5 is sort of a retelling of Exodus 20, or at least the part of Exodus 20 that we are concerned with. So those 2 chapters are pretty much identical. So knowing that, every chapter he mentioned is written on stone tablets. That becomes pretty clear when you actually read the chapters that he's posting. But as for Exodus 34, it is true that that is the only one that actually says the phrase, the Ten Commandments. However, it is important to note that what was written on the 2 stone tablets was not just the Ten Commandments. That is just a misconception propagated by movies and pop culture, but what was written on the stone tablets included all the stuff we normally associate with the Ten Commandments, plus the Ten Commandments as spoken of in Exodus 34, and perhaps some other stuff too. Now, the first verse of chapter 34 of Exodus reads, "And the Lord said unto Moses, Hew thee 2 tables of stone like unto the first, and I will write upon these tables the words that were in the first tables which thou breakest." So, on these tables contains not only what is officially termed the Ten Commandments, but also everything that was written down in Exodus 20. Is there a misconception about what is called the Ten Commandments? Yes. Is Mr. Cosmic trying to create a problem where there is none? Also yes.
Western civilization, the civilization that developed universal human rights, created women's equality, ended slavery, created parliamentary democracy, among other unique achievements, would not have developed without them.
Okay, firstly, nobody invented women's equality. Women have always been equal. It's just taken us a bit of time to realize. But slavery, you're really going to bring up slavery? Not only does the Bible not outlaw and not condemn slavery, it actively condones it, going as far as to give you instructions as to how to keep your slaves. Now, I know many people argue that slavery back then in biblical times was more like a kind of work contract as we'd recognize it today. But answer me this, imagine that you got a new job and one day your employer comes over to you and you've either done something wrong or maybe you've done everything right and he's just in a bad mood and he decides to beat you up. Is that okay? Because according to the Bible it is. The Bible says that you can beat your slaves mercilessly as long as they don't die. It's only if they die that you need to be punished for it, but as long as they get up after a few days, it's all good. It's all very well and good saying that the Bible was used by people to abolish slavery, but it was also used just as legitimately to defend it. So we're not off to a great start here.
So first, Mr. Cosmic strawmans Prager University about women's equality, and it won't be the only strawman he makes. Prager University did not say that America invented women's equality. He said it created women's equality, because before that, women did not have equal rights. Yes, women were intrinsically equal, as laid out in the Bible, but being equal and having equal rights are not the same thing. And it's funny how Mr. Cosmic recognizes his own straw man about slavery. He wants to say the Bible condones slavery, but then he admits that it's not the kind of slavery he's talking about the Bible condoning. And then he tries to defend his obvious straw man with a false analogy. If your boss beats you up, you get workers' comp. You get a restitution for that, as did the servants in Bible times, in ancient Israel. If you beat your servant, his debts were paid and he went free. The punishment for the person who did the beating was that he lost money. But of course, Mr. Cosmic doesn't like reading things in context, so he misses that.
As you will see when each of the 10 commandments is explained, these commandments are as relevant today as when they were given over 3,000 years ago. In fact, they're so relevant that the 10 Commandments are all that is necessary to make a good world, a world free of tyranny and cruelty.
Well, except for the fact that they don't seem to mention slavery, rape, pedophilia. You get the picture.
Imagine for a moment a world in which there was no murder or theft. In such a world, there would be no need for armies or police or weapons. Men and women and children could walk anywhere, at any time of day or night, without any fear of being killed or robbed. Imagine further a world in which no one coveted what belonged to their neighbor.
Ah, yes, this is a good one. The only of the 10 Commandments that doesn't just tell you what you can't do, it tells you what you can't want. You're not allowed to think in this way. God knows what you're thinking and can punish you for it. This is, as Hitchens said, totalitarianism defined. But also, without the coveting of what other people have, there would be no incentive to go out and get it. If you didn't want money, then what's the point in starting a business? If you didn't want a family, then what's the point in socializing? If you don't want the success that you see in others, if you don't covet to be at their level, then you will never have any reason to try to get there. This also, to divert for just a moment, seems to completely undermine the idea of capitalism, which relies on the desire to obtain more wealth, more goods, more success. And if there's one channel on YouTube which defends capitalism to no end, it's Prager University.
I'm not going to spend any time defending capitalism because I am not a political channel, so I don't really care about that. But Mr. Cosmic clearly seems to have a misconception about covetousness. It is not thou shalt not covet anything, it's thou shalt not covet thy neighbor's wife or thy neighbor's donkey. You can want a wife of your own or a donkey of your own. You can covet that. Just don't covet what belongs to your neighbor, because you know what that leads to? Slavery, rape, pedophilia, you get the idea.
A world in which children honored their mother and father and the family unit thrived.
But of course, no mention of parents having to respect their children in return, so God presumably doesn't care all that much about child abuse and domestic violence of this kind. No. As long as children always respect their parents, and if they don't, well then you should kill them.
Now this is actually a tricky one to answer. Not because he's right or anything, and certainly not because of that last point he made, but because of the context. Because of course the Bible itself does condemn child abuse, but the context isn't the Bible as a whole. The context is the law, specifically the 10 Commandments. Though the law does condemn sexual abuse of children with incest laws and rape laws, but what about physical abuse? The problem with making that kind of law is, where do you draw the line? You can't just write a law that says thou shalt not strike your child, because then that would remove any possibility of discipline. So, for the question of why doesn't the 10 Commandments have a commandment not to abuse your children, I believe that would come down to the fact that most people would not abuse their children, and one person's abuse is another person's discipline. Where do you draw the line between discipline and abuse? But I may give this to Cosmic Skeptic, that the 10 Commandments by themselves do not necessarily defend against child abuse. I could try and make a case that it's not loving to God and therefore breaking the first commandment, but that seems like a cop-out since that would apply to every commandment. I could say murder's not loving God, which makes thou shalt not murder redundant, so I won't try and make that argument.
You see, if the 10 Commandments, as great as they are, were given by any human authority, then any person could say, Who is this man Moses? Who is this king or queen? Who is this government to tell me how I should behave?
And I'm sorry, but who is your God? If he does exist and did create me, then that doesn't automatically give his whim precedence over my life. If I created a society of people, it's not moral of me to torture or mistreat them just because I created them. If God wants to tell me how to behave, then he better have a damn good reason for doing so. And saying, oh well, it's because I'm God, isn't good enough. Remember when you were a kid and you used to ask your parents for something and they say no, and you say, well, why? And they say, oh, because I said so. That's what your God seems to be doing, and it's not very helpful.
And why did your parents say, because I said so? It's because you're a stupid child who keeps saying why, and your feeble adolescent brain is not old enough to comprehend the reason that your parents have for whatever they told you. God does have reasons for everything he does, but he is not obligated to tell you those reasons. And whether you like it or not, God does not torture or mistreat us. And here, Mr. Cosmic, the person who believes morality is subjective, is trying to make a moral claim. You can't claim morality is subjective and then say it's not moral of you to do something. Now, speaking objectively about what is and is not moral, the reason you would not be able to mistreat and torture a society of people that you created, the reason you can't do that is because you're not God. You are not the standard of morality. You are appealing to another standard. You're appealing to God, the very same God who would be the God of any people or society that you create. Therefore, their morality and your morality would have the same objective standard. But don't get confused. I am not saying that God can be immoral because he's the standard. Morality is tied within his very nature, so it would be impossible for him to be immoral.
I have no doubt that if you're an atheist and you say that you believe murder is wrong, you believe murder is wrong. But forgive me, you do need God to tell you. We all need God to tell us. You see, even if you figured out murder is wrong on your own, without God and the Ten Commandments, how do you know it's wrong?
The same way that you know that chocolate tastes better than tar, because it's a subjective opinion that you hold that just so happens to be shared pretty much universally among everybody else to the extent that it may as well be objective. But just because every single other person on the planet, pretty much with a few exceptional exceptions, would agree that chocolate tastes better than tar, doesn't make it an objective fact. In fact, if you think about it, trying to objectively measure taste doesn't make any sense whatsoever, and I'm sorry to say that the same thing applies to morality. First you prove that objective morality actually exists, then we can talk about where it comes from. It's not moral of me. First you prove that objective morality actually exists. It's not moral of me.
Subjective morality is an oxymoron. It does not and cannot exist, much like objective taste. What I think makes this argument so convincing to Cosmic Skeptic and people like him is that people will argue in objective terms about subjective facts. For instance, I can objectively claim that Mega Man is the best game that ever existed. It's an objective claim, but it is a subjective fact. Murder is wrong is an objective fact. And here's one way you can tell the difference. If you've ever gotten in a heated argument about which music artist is better, you will try and argue from an objective point. But no matter how heated the argument gets, at the end of the day, you still understand that it's just your subjective opinion. This is not the case for murder. If somebody tries to tell you that murder is a good thing, you're not going to just agree to disagree. And I almost forgot the faulty appeal to majority. Even if everybody who ever existed, excluding God of course, because he's the standard, even if every human who ever existed agreed that murder is wrong, that would not make it objectively true. It is objectively true regardless of human opinion. What if tomorrow everybody on the planet suddenly decided that pedophilia is morally acceptable? Do you think that would make it true? Of course you wouldn't, because morality is not subjective.
Another problem with the view that you don't need God to believe that murder is wrong is A lot of people haven't shared your view.
Yeah, like God, when he decides that murder is okay. Although, of course, this only happens in the very exceptional circumstances of retaliation for heinous crimes such as loving the wrong person or getting the wrong kind of haircut.
Big straw man here. Mr. Cosmic purposely misunderstands the difference between murder and executions. Executions, by definition, are not murder.
Okay. But also, who's to say that your God is the correct higher power? I'm pretty sure that Salman Abedi was just conforming to the wishes of his own higher power when he blew himself up at an Ariana Grande concert. The only difference is that his God is different to yours. And the only way that you can say that one God is better than another is through some kind of subjective analysis of the morality that they command.
The only difference is that his God is different than yours. Okay? The only difference between a Kit Kat and a Twix is that a Kit Kat is different than a Twix. Do you see the problem there? You can tell that one God is better than another because one of them is real. You don't need to compare their moral claims. Although you can, because morality is written on your heart. But since some people have a seared conscience or otherwise corrupted view of morality, it is not a foolproof method to appeal to what you know is good and right in your heart to judge moral claims between different gods. Just figure out which God is real, it's Jesus by the way, and then go from there.